Derek Wheatley, and welcome to episode 96 of the Weekly podcast. Thank you very much for joining us on YouTube or the podcast platforms, whichever you decide on. Thank you very much to Emma McInerney for coming on last week. Emma's a life coach. If you haven't listened to it, go back and do so, because I learned a lot from it. And then we started talking about really random stuff, photography, serial killers, just weird stuff. We got deep on it, but it's very interesting, and especially the life coach thing is great. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you would. Thanks to everyone for your support, obviously, during the week and all that. But we're going to get into today's guest. The hardest introduction I've had to write, trying to cover everything. But I'm just going to say one of Ireland's finest writers, and she is Lisa McInerney. How are you doing, Lisa?
Hello, how are you? That's not. I like to hear that. That is a difficult intro to write. That's something I've achieved today.
There you go. It's what I like. You want to keep it short, but you also want to put in, put in a couple of the novels, just to say it, and say that you did win the Women's Prize for Fiction. But we're going to get into all that anyway, so it's all one. But look, we'll start at the beginning like we always do, Lisa. Could you give us a short history of your upbringing, please?
Yes, so I've had a bit of I was going to say a funny upbringing, but actually it's not so uncommon in Ireland. So I was born in the early 1980s, and at the time my mother was single, and we still had the illegitimacy laws in Ireland, which were only gotten rid of, I think, in 1987. So I was raised then by my grandparents. They kind of absorbed me into the legitimate family. Okay. And so instead of being an only child, which is what I kind of feel like, I am legally the youngest of 9. Yeah, so it's a bit funny, although the siblings in question are all like at least 20 years older than me, but still. I'm raised in South County Galway, working class background. I feel like I mentioned this constantly and people are sick of it, but I do feel it's important, so I keep bringing it up. Yeah, and that's it. Kind of in case anybody picks up on the strange dyadic accent, I kind of popped between Galway and Cork for a very long time. So that'll probably come in when we're talking about the books.
But the working class thing, like, it's something you're very proud of, though.
Yeah, I mean, like, I feel it's very important in terms of it's not just kind of like explaining family history. It also very much shapes you, what you are, what your expectations of life are, anything you've kind of not necessarily struggled to overcome, but different limitations that were put on you and how you kind of coped with that. And I feel like that's important. I think that there's nothing wrong with kind of crowing a bit about it or talking a bit about it, because I do find, especially in the creative arts, you do find a lot of people who come from backgrounds that are underrepresented, no matter what kind of background that is. And sometimes it helps to be told, yeah, actually it's doable. Somebody has gotten there before you. There is a path. You'll figure it out, so often when I was starting out writing, I often felt like almost like that I put limitations on myself based on what I thought society was going to do or what I thought the industry was going to do. I mean, everyone kept saying, oh, publishing is extremely middle class and you're not going to find a way through. And I realized afterwards that a lot of these ideas that I had about those limitations were kind of self-imposed. So I think sometimes it does help to kind of make a bit of a song and dance about the fact that there are some diverse backgrounds coming through in the creative arts.
Yeah, and it's for other people to aspire to, and it's kind of with something we've addressed when it comes to mental health as well, because we do need people who are, out there in the public eye talking about it, because it does become easier then for people like me or anybody else to kind of start realizing that it's a very normal thing and these things happen to people.
This is exactly it. I think just in general, knowing that you're not alone in some way, or that this, whatever you were going through has been gone through before with varying different results. It can make you feel less like, oh God, there's something wrong with me, and more, oh God, this is a challenge that people overcome in life.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually going on the mental health thing, when did you first become aware of mental health?
Oh God, very negatively, I'm going to say. Unfortunately, there is a kind of history of mental illnesses and self-harm within my family. So things that I kind of was very young and not really noticing per se, but being kind of told about in an age-appropriate way. So for me, mental health, it was always kind of the other way around. It was always mental illness growing up, and kind of becoming aware of the head and being part of, or your mind being part of your physical health, only when things went very, very wrong. unfortunately. So I was thinking back over it and I was going, well, when did I become aware of this? And that's unfortunately the case. It was because things were going wrong. I mean, I remember going to visit like my family members in psychiatric hospitals and stuff growing up and kind of going, oh, this is grand.
Yeah.
And it's only kind of, I think, in very recent years, almost the idea of mental health being something that you can take care of as part of, your daily life and your daily attitude to life, and something that has to be kind of maintained and looked after and given mind to, rather than something that only comes up when things go very, very wrong, So that's quite recent. But I was thinking too, maybe not as uncommon or not as kind of new as I thought, because I remember reading these magazines when I was a teenager, these magazines for girls, and they all came from England, and they were all kind of things like Sugar and Bliss and stuff, and they were all loads and loads and loads, like packed with problem pages, constant problem pages, and various different agony aunts with different kind of specialities, relationships or sex or bodies or stuff like that. And that was just constantly full of advice and going, problems are normal. And it helps to talk about them, and be good, be kind to your friends, and don't kind of destroy your social circle because of a boy and all this kind of stuff. So in a strange way, I was thinking that was the healthiest introduction to it as a subject I think I got.
In a magazine called Bliss, it's kind of it's and it's great, like, but it's one of those things that you're right though. It's like we don't think of it as we need to look after and be on top of these things. Like if something happens, it's like when something happens, and then it's like trying to scramble. That's what happened to me. It did happen, and then I had to kind of scramble, and it took a few years to kind of get out of there and into kind of where I felt all right again. And we talked. This question has always come up, and it always gives me such a range of kind of interesting answers. And I really like this question. It's one that's probably my favorite question actually when I ask them. But I like to ask one broad question every episode. And this is the broad question for you, Lisa. Can you describe a day in the life for a writer?
Oh, well, the thing is, it's all so different for each writer. So I could describe a day in the life of this writer.
Yeah.
Because there are some writers who'd really make you sick, because they're talking about like, oh, I got up at 5:30, and I went and I ran a marathon, and I was at the desk by 7 with my black coffee, and I wrote 15,000 words. And I stopped by lunchtime. That's not me. I do get up and I do actually go running, so that's a bit sickening too. But I don't kind of get to the desk until maybe 12:30, 1 o'clock in the day, and then I kind of set a limit on myself, or a goal for myself to write 1,000 words.
Right.
And the 1,000 words, this is if I'm writing, because there's a lot of work as a writer that's admin as well, and kind of answering emails, keeping on top of things, and kind of organizing meetings and all this kind of stuff, because you're self-employed in your business. Unfortunately, the boring stuff is there as well. But if I'm writing creatively, 1,000 words. And like the thing with that goal is they don't have to be 1,000 great words. They don't have to be words that I feel, my God, this is publishable, give me a prize immediately. They could be 1,000 words, of which 700 are unusable. I might get rid of again tomorrow. But for me, I feel like I have to be doing like hitting goals. That's kind of a main thing for me to keep motivated and to kind of feel good about myself at the end of the day. So if I've done that, and it doesn't matter if I've finished that by 4 o'clock, or if I haven't finished by dinner and I have to go back to the desk and afterwards, at least it's done. And I feel like I've achieved something. So that's me. And then in the evening, I'll wind down. Then after that, I'll eat all around me at dinner, and then I'll wind down. I'll read a book maybe, although sometimes that can feel like work too. Read a book, or I might watch something, or I might play a video game and try to get to bed then by 11, 12 o'clock. I'm very boring, I've just realized.
I am a lot more boring than that, Lisa, trust me. But I think it's funny because I heard David Sedaris on a podcast the other day, and he was talking about, and similar to what you're saying, but it was more 9 o'clock maybe to 1 o'clock, I think he said, where he works. And then I've heard like someone like Hunter S. Thompson, who's full of mescaline and all sorts of chemicals, and he's writing in the middle of the night. So it's just interesting to hear that it's interesting to hear that the idea of the different takes, and whether it's hours or whether it's words, and just that kind of thing. It's interesting to me.
It's funny, really, because you do often hear about the really early morning writers or the real night owl writers, and I'm out here kind of blazing a trail for the afternoon writers.
Yes, I like it. Someone has to do it. Again, we're talking that you can go back.
A pioneer.
So what, like, do you know what was like for me, when I first read your novel, The Glorious Heresies, okay, so obviously set in Cork, and my mom is from Cork, and yeah, and I was like, oh, then your next novel comes out set in Cork, so obviously the same kind of characters that we're going through, but then I find out you're from Galway. And it got me thinking, and I know what you were saying about flipping between, and I know you went to university in Cork as well, but it was this novel always, are these novels always going to be in Cork, or was there a chance they could have been in Galway?
No, they were always Cork, like these characters, and they came to me, and for me it always starts with characters and voices and dialogue and the way people interact. So characters come first, and then the kind of plot comes after that. And they came into my head speaking in Cork accents. I don't think the books could be set anywhere else. They kind of very much need a certain geographical kind of size as well for the amount of coincidences that happen, and also equally the amount of anonymity you can get in a city the size of Cork, as opposed to Galway, where everybody knows everybody all the time. There's a slight larger kind of sense of space in Cork. And just in general, the Cork kind of way of thinking about oneself to the second city thing.
Yeah,
I needed to get that into. So no, they were always Corkonians in my head. It's funny really. I think I'm going to try for the next project maybe to write something that isn't Cork, but we'll have to see how the characters sound in my head.
Yeah, it suits it perfectly, like you say though, and the dialect of Cork is something like, because it's the whole second city thing, and fiction in Ireland is obviously set, a lot of it's set in Dublin. There's set in Limerick as well, of course. Yeah. But for something like that to be set in Cork, a trilogy be set in, actually the Cork Trilogy, did you name it that, or did someone else name it that?
I don't think I ever came up with a unifying kind of name for them. At the moment, I think my publisher is calling them the Unholy Trinity or something like that. And I'm like going, and they're saying like, that's a great name. I'm really glad you came up with that. And I'm thinking, I don't remember coming up with that at all. Like,
to be honest though, I think that's a great name.
Oh, well, if you like it, then we'll keep it.
Yeah, oh yes, brilliant. I've had something. I've done something, but does winning something like because I wrote this down, right? The Women's Prize for Fiction, and I wrote down some of the winners like Andrea Levy, Neil Shriver, Zadie Smith, Marilyn Robinson, A.M. Holmes, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. These are just the novels that I've read on them. There's obviously some other brilliant works on it. Does it add pressure when you are sitting down to work on the next project?
Oh God, absolutely. It really, really does. And it's a strange thing, because I think when you're starting out writing, you kind of have in your head, well, if I get some sort of recognition, whether it's by, sales or a prize or kind of attention from media, whatever it might be, if I reach that, if I get that, then I'll be grand after that. And I won't feel imposter syndrome, or I won't feel, whatever pressure it might be that you're putting on yourself. And that's not like it completely, like it morphs into a different kind of pressure. And then imposter syndrome, if anything for me, got worse. The idea of, oh God, they've made a terrible mistake. How do I stop them from finding out? So the idea then is like thinking, well, is this novel is it like lightning in a bottle? How do I do it again? And now that I know that people are expecting a certain kind of thing, are they going to get annoyed if I change it up slightly? Or it's a weird amount of pressure, and not one I'd recommend really. Although I do occasionally look, because when you win the Women's Prize, they do give you a little brass figurine, and her name is Bessie.
Okay.
She lives on my mantle. That wasn't my name. That's the name of the.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Otherwise, I sound very whimsical, don't I? And I named her Bessie.
Yeah.
So her name is Bessie, and she lives on my mantelpiece. And occasionally I look at her and I go, okay, well, they can't take this away. And
no.
I don't think so anyway. They can't rescind her.
No, they can't. I'm sure they can't. I would have to look into it, but I'm pretty sure they can't.
It's never happened before, but
yeah. Lisa, do you know what I'll do now? I'll read the ads so we can get back into it. It's okay. Okay, mutants, let's try and get this right again. Fusion Training Centre, Monksland, Athlone. A place to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, martial arts and CrossFit. A great atmosphere with experienced coaches and a real sense of community. If you want to join the team, find us on Facebook at Fusion Training Centre or drop in for a chat. Fusion Training Centre, train like a warrior. We're in the, I said to Lisa earlier on, I'm actually wearing the hoodie as well. That's how much I represent that place. But Yeah, let's get back into it. Do you know, Lisa? There's one thing I notice about the novels in general, and obviously, what it kicked off with your debut novel. The skills you have for writing multiple characters that are shaped like singular characters, rather than just having people here, there in different houses, and they're just flitting in and out of stories. How do you keep each one of those unique?
Oh God. I mean, that's a really excellent question. And I think the problem is if you had an answer to that, that would be you'd make your fortune off
Yeah.
it. I think that sometimes there's no kind of formula for something like that. It takes for me, and again, I'm just speaking from my own
Yeah.
point of view as a writer, because every writer has a different way of working. But for me, it would just be down to really knowing each character, spending a lot of time with them in my head, and kind of enjoying that as well, enjoying that process, and kind of going, well, how would so and so react to this, or what would happen if so and so and so and so met in this particular place, or just spending a lot of time with them. Then they become more fully formed as people, and then you find that they start almost existing outside of your imagination. And I know that sounds very strange when you say it to somebody who's not necessarily very imaginative or very creative, or not really kind of part of that thing, part of that world. But the idea being that eventually a character will feel so fully formed and real that if you try to put them into a certain scenario, or you try to give them a line of dialogue that doesn't work for them, it as a writer, you go, oh, this isn't working. As you're typing it out or writing it out, whatever the case may be, you're going, oh, this is so awkward and forced, or there's nothing flowing. That is when each character kind of really fully exists as a person, and that's kind of what you're hoping to get, I think, as a writer.
Yeah, like I'm sure every writer is trying to do it, and it doesn't work for everyone. It doesn't happen all the time, and which is it's just a skill in itself. But there's a couple of characters I want to touch on, because obviously Ryan Cusack is he in the first novel. There's a lot of characters that kind of come to the fore, but when we go into the second, it becomes Ryan's kind of world, and we follow that. I'm very sad that we won't hear the album by Lord. I am, though, it's because it's like, I know I'm going off topic a bit here, but in the third novel, right, your latest novel, there's little sections where you describe each song, and because the backstory, that's what it is, and you get you're so invested in the characters and the backstory, and then you're thinking, I wonder what that song would sound like. We won't get to hear it, but that's all right. But do you consider Ryan as kind of an anti-hero?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a good way of looking at him, really. I mean, for me, he's the heart of the trilogy, really. He really does kind of bring things along. I think he's the youngest of the characters. So I start off with like 5 characters in the very first book, and he's the youngest of them. So I think because of that, you feel like he has the most potential, whether it's in a good way or a bad way.
Yeah.
There's a lot more kind of writing on him. He's like the heart of the whole thing, really, for me, Ryan. Yeah, I've gone off now on a tangent.
No, it's the kind like because I was thinking of the way I was going to kind of ask the question, and like, was it anti-hero? Is he a lovable rogue? Is he? There's many ways you could think of it.
Yeah, there really is, and the funny thing is, readers react to him in very different ways sometimes. So you get some readers that get on to me, and they think that, oh, I just want him to be okay. I really like him, and I hope he's all right. And then there's other readers who like, I tell you what, that pup, I throw him out a window.
Yeah,
he's like a terrible person. And I'm like, I think that's cool. Like, yeah. I love the idea that he kind of sets off different feelings in different people. You don't have to like him. There's a lot that Ryan does that's not likable. But I think when you're writing characters, you don't need them to be likable always. You just need them to be interesting. And I think he's definitely interesting. Would you call him like an anti-hero? Yeah, like probably, because hopefully he captures your interest and keeps it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't expect you to agree with a lot of his choices. In fact, it's better if you don't, I think. Because he does get himself into awful messes. And I think the best kind of reaction you can get as a writer is a reader saying like, oh, I was nearly shouting at the page.
Yeah.
Stop it. Stop that. What are you doing?
Yeah.
I mean, like, that is the best possible kind of thing, where you just want to intervene in some way.
Yeah, I love the character. I think it's brilliant. And there was a conversation I heard. Look, I don't follow Marvel or Disney or any of that, but someone was saying that, this certain film didn't work because there was no hero in it. And I was kind of thinking, well, does there have to be a hero in it?
Yeah, I don't know. I was always the kid that liked the villains. Like,
Yeah,
everything they were just more interesting, weren't they? They like almost like a hero. When you write somebody who is truly good, you don't really have to examine them. They don't really have any conflict. You know that they're not going to succumb to kind of being petty or kind of wanting revenge or any of those little kind of, just anger or something.
Yeah.
We know that won't happen, or if it does, it won't happen for long. But villains are more like real people in the sense that they're completely fleshed out. They usually, well, a good villain, they're usually motivated in some way with that, and ideally we can understand them again, even if we don't agree with them. Like, I was always the kid that really, really identified with the baddies. But I mean, it's not just me. I know you don't follow Disney, and I don't either, really. But like, I mean, like, if you think about the way in pop culture, especially adults, kind of people who grew up on various Disney films in the 80s and the 90s and stuff, it's the Disney villains they love, or they've become the icons, and kind of they have all the best lines, So there's myriad reasons for that, but yeah, I'm a villainous creature.
Villainous creature, that's good. I like that. But the thing about it, like, he's a deeply flawed character, but when you in the first novel, he's 15 years of age, and that has to be taken into account as well. But there's another character who is my favorite character as well, is Maureen, because, well, it's just, I mean, she's a bit of everything. She's very lovable, I think. A lot of things have happened to her. Where did the inspiration for Maureen come from?
Oh, so this is interesting. So for people who haven't read the books, Maureen is, she starts off, I think she is 59 at the very start of the Glorious Heresies. So she has come home to Ireland after being 40 years in London. She went away after having a baby out of wedlock. Her parents, kind of like in my family situation, her parents decided to adopt the baby that she had. But rather than it being kind of seen as a positive thing, which was my experience, it was a negative thing in her life. So she was kind of sent almost into exile, go to London, get a job, get out of her sight, kind of thing. So she's come back. She's been brought home by her son, who's now 40. He's brought her back to Ireland. And she's kind of back in an Ireland that is very changed from what she remembers. Her kind of ideas of Ireland are still stuck in the kind of mid 20th century or late 20th century, very Catholic, very kind of restrictive Ireland, and she's come back like post-millennium, and things have changed massively, and she's still fighting this big Catholic monster in her head, and other people are like if there's parts of the Glorious Heresies where she tries to kind of have this angry confession to a priest, and sure, the priest hasn't a clue what she's talking about. You know what I mean? Because things have changed. So where she came from, like, for a start, I suppose me wanting to explore that kind of strange aspect of my own upbringing, or touch on it in some way, that kind of history of these practical solutions to the religious problems that we had in the 20th century. So when your daughter shamed the family, what do you do? And this was a very practical and common solution, was adopt the baby and somehow kind of try and brush the rest of it under the carpet. So there's that. And also, I think she comes in a lot of ways, she's a lot younger than my grandmother, but my grandmother kind of has gotten to the stage in her life where she's just like gone, you know what, I raised a massive family. I've done my time. I'm going to say now what I like. I'm going to come out with the opinions I like. You can listen or not listen, but I'm fed up being nice. And like that can be extremely funny as well, because my grandmother has a wicked sense of humor. Like, she really does love needling people, like a bit of that. And also Maureen, I think, has become very much a cautionary tale to myself. I'm kind of going, you know what, girl, you're going to end up like this one now if you're not careful.
I love the, the battle she seems to kind of want to have with the Catholic Church, but also the relationship that, she has with Ryan, and she kind of adopts him in a way, even though he's maybe pushing back against it at times. But there's just something about her that reminded me of a few different people that I know or knew. And in a good way as well, like, but in that way where there's something that it could kick off at any time. And I think that's what's interesting about her, because of the way she has to talk to her own son, and there's moments where she really has to stand up to him, and you're kind of going, you're rooting for her. And I think she was the character, I guess, I was rooting for most in throughout the novels. I think it was great. There's there's a number of themes throughout. There's loads of themes throughout the novels, but I just touch on a couple. So there's obviously drugs, the underworld, infidelity, religion, mental health. How do, like, it's going back, I guess, to the idea of writing about what you know. How do you like get all of those things kind of right without sounding like you're faking it a bit? Because I've read that in novels where I haven't quite believed what the person was trying to say.
I think the issue is if you start writing a novel, a story, whatever you start making, or even if you, whatever creative work you start on, and you have the theme in your head from the beginning and you want to make it a method to deliver your theme, then you're not writing a story or you're not creating art. What you're doing is you're trying to lecture people in a way, whether it's it could be from the most, beautiful sentiment, but you're still trying to lecture people. So if the characters are allowed to exist in a novel, in a story, and their world is allowed to exist, without the writer getting involved and trying to push through what they think their own very important thoughts are, then I think that the stuff that you want to say as the writer, as the artist, will naturally find a way through the characters without it feeling like it's being heavy-handed or kind of really pushed at it. I think it needs to feel organic. And I think oddly, kind of, you can only do that really without trying to, if that makes any sense. I think when you're writing about characters like this, and these are characters that are very much characters from that same background that I have, so they're kind of like peripheral to society almost, and they're constantly looking for that way in that's often denied to them, or that's often kind of feeling very kind of out of the way or kind of difficult to grasp. And then those themes that you were talking about, well, they come through naturally in that kind of struggle. These are things that happen, and therefore these are things that the characters will deal with. So they do come through because that's kind of, they're all part of life, and especially part of life where you feel peripheral to what's going on. You feel like life is some sort of big party that you haven't been invited in. You're outside the windows looking in, so I think it's a natural thing, or I hope it is anyway.
No, it's just because I got into my mind of thinking about people who tend to, it's cultural appropriation kind of idea of writing down, or an author deciding that the coolest thing to write about now would be, the underworld, or even just saying something like the working class, and it's a big topic. It's a hot topic, cultural appropriation, and it's just, to find an authentic writer like that, I know you've been compared to like someone like Irvine Welsh, I guess kind of that working class, like I've seen over in Scotland, like I've read many novels that seem like that, like we were just saying there about that kind of idea of cultural appropriation, and they never land, and it's like you're trying to get into it, you're trying to get, you feel like you're plowing, like you said, what reading isn't always, sometimes it feels like hard work. And I think that when something doesn't come across like that, it does feel like hard work.
Yeah, I think for me as a reader, like it becomes immediately apparent if somebody is kind of trying to write about a background that isn't so much something that they don't come from or don't share, because it is totally possible to write about worlds that aren't yours if you write about it with kind of like a bit of cop on and a bit of empathy and understanding and a bit of curiosity as well. But there's often, it comes back to that thing we were talking about, like if you come in with a theme in your arms and you're like going, I must deliver this theme. And I think a lot of those kind of inauthentic voices, as it were, are ones where you feel like the author has something that they want to say, a great philosophy that they have about this background that isn't their own, and that their story is a means of delivering that. You can kind of tell.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, one of my favorite songs, Pulp, Common People. And Jarvis Cocker, of course, a working class background himself, and like that spat line that he says in Common People, because you think that poor is cool, and it never left me. And I think that was the first time I actually felt, oh my God, he's right.
He does nail it though, because the people do think it's cool, and I suppose that's what I was getting at, the idea of someone writing, about things that they're not a part of because they think it's cool and it might sell more copies and stuff.
Yeah, the idea of a working class character as well being like this earthy character who's closer to desperation, and so can kind of make all of these mad decisions that you wouldn't necessarily make as a nice, secure person, and it becomes kind of like a way of experiencing like class or grime or dirt without actually getting your hands dirty. That is like that's where it really loses me. I'm just like, oh no, there's a bit more to it than that. Actually, the vast majority of people I know from working class backgrounds are extremely boring.
Yeah. Do you know, I because obviously nobody can see my copy of something myself, and it's in front of me, and I've gone from kind of a serious kind of thing, and then in a box I have written Conor McGregor is a gowl. Now, because it was the funniest part of the whole trilogy. Like it's a funny, like you said, Maureen's very funny. There's very funny moments and characters in it. But the neighbor's internet password is Conor McGregor's gowl, and immediately I read it. I was laughing at it, obviously, but I was thinking I'd love that to be my internet password. It's great.
It's actually it's even better than that, because there's even more of a hint of disdain in it, because it wasn't just Conor McGregor is a goal, it's Conor McGregor is some goal.
Oh, it's some goal. That's worse.
That word "some" just carries an awful lot more.
That is way worse. And you know, it's gowl. Gowl is a brilliant word, and it's not really used around here. It's not really used in Athlone, right? But I do love it.
To introduce it to Athlone parlance.
I'm gonna make a t-shirt up and just have Conor McGregor as a gowl on it. But like, I suppose it rings true. What I actually think he is a bit of a gowl. So it just, for me, it makes a lot of sense. But I just thought that was a brilliant line, or just, you know, the internet pastor being that. But imagine you were in some. That's another thing. What, you know, those real, when you put yourself in a real life situation, if you did on your phone, it came up, somebody had that password, and it's kind of, that was running through my head when I was reading, like, you know.
It would totally be a thing you'd see, like some people's got a Wi-Fi networks names and stuff that you pick up is just like, oh my god, that's so funny.
Oh, there's some weird stuff out there. There really is, like, for passwords. At what point did it turn into a trilogy?
I think it always, I wouldn't say it always was, because the idea for the first kind of plot idea that came to me was the Blood Miracles, which is the second book. And I was like, no, I can't start here. There's more to be said beforehand. And as soon as I went back and kind of tried to figure out from the Glorious Heresies, it was immediately apparent that there'd be more after as well. So from when we sold the novel to the publishers, it was like, this is going to be 3 books. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And luckily they were like, yeah, let's give it a go and see what happens. So I always knew that there would be 3. And in my head, the kind of plan for the 3 very, very vaguely, which I hope I've kept in some ways, like sex, drugs, rock and roll. So the first book, when I say sex, I don't necessarily mean it's like, you know, all about the wonders of eroticism, but more about like Catholic shame and the family and kind of the women's roles in society and all these, like, underneath the rollicking, I hope, plot, not as a main kind of treatise or anything like that. And the second book, because it kind of hones in on Ryan and the kind of very bold things he does to make a few bob, is about drugs, and that's kind of fairly obvious. And then that left rock and roll. So I was like going, okay, we're going to go into creativity and making things and kind of expressing oneself in the third book. So I hope it kind of worked out very nicely. I'm happy enough anyway. Yeah,
no, I think it's definitely worked out. And you know, at the end of the third, when it comes, I won't spoil it, but like it comes to the end and you're kind of like, could be a 4th there. You know, because you've, I guess it's the love of the characters, and you must have a deep love for the characters. And like, how do you I suppose let those characters go after this trilogy?
Like, I'm bereft.
Okay.
I even, like, in my head I check in on them occasionally and I wonder how they're getting on in lockdown. But like, for me, I feel like at where I've left it feels like, and again, no spoilers, I feel like it's almost like bringing the child to the school gates and going, okay, now you have to go and do this bit on your own. I might check in on you again, the way Roddy did with the Guts. He checked in on the Barrytown gang after 30 years, I think it was. So never say never. But I feel like I need to move on at this point. But I think also it's a good thing to leave a reader thinking, well, there could be more after this, or the characters still have lives to live, because you don't want people to get to the end of a book and feel like the characters just kind of slump back into a dark place, like kind of little puppets with the strings cut. You know, that's not what you want. You want people to kind of think, oh, they'll go on and get into more adventures and scrapes from here. We just won't see them, at least.
You kind of like, it's like, a good novel is like a good film as well. It's that idea of you like to think that the characters will go on and be
Yeah.
great, and
Like they've existed before and they've existed after.
Mm.
It's hopefully the kind of feeling you want to give. Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to my last guest, Emma, just towards the end of the podcast last week. We were talking a little bit about books, and I said that you were coming on, and we were chatting a bit about that. And it's like the two of us both mentioned that we didn't read enough Irish fiction, and which is a bit of a shame, because there's, when you look at it, there's a lot which
it's a lot of us.
but I don't know what it is. Like, it's not like I'm purposefully avoiding Irish fiction. It's got nothing to do with that. I do enjoy, since I started reading properly, like seriously, kind of reading quite a bit. I've always enjoyed American novels, American short stories, and I don't know if it's because the Irish thing is here and I'm living it, and if that is it, I don't know, but it could be. But when I read your work, or speaking of Roddy Doyle, you read the Barrytown trilogy, it feels, obviously it feels like home, but it feels so much more than that. It feels like you could be related to these characters, I hope, and then maybe not, I don't want to be related to all of them, but just maybe some. But I think there is a hole in my kind of reading where I don't know what it is, and I'd love to. Do you read a lot of Irish writers?
I do. I absolutely do know, because it's kind of, it becomes kind of part of your writing life or your work. You have to kind of, you don't have to, but it's nice to know what your contemporaries are up to. And there's some amazing writers working in Ireland who admire greatly, the likes of Gavin Corbett, the likes of Danny Denton. We've got Nicole Flattery is amazing. There's loads and loads and loads of, and you want to know what they're up to, and you want to keep an eye on the competition, like, but there's that. But it's funny that you say that, because before it was published, I wouldn't have read as much of them. And it wasn't that they weren't there. I think, again, like you, I kind of assumed it was almost too domestic for me or something, or that it would be too. I think sometimes we read because we want to learn things, or we want to be in unusual kind of places that we're not aware of, or societies that we don't know our way around. And we want that kind of escapism almost, with curiosity, with learning about other cultures. So I can understand that. And I still can, to my great shame, a lot of the Irish writers of the 20th century, I'm not as hot up on as I should be. Do you know what I mean? So there's a lot of gaps in my Irish reading, as it were. But I mean, that's kind of like, it's a bad way to look at it too, because we should never kind of think of writing as something, or books as something that we must read, or should be embarrassed for not reading. It's supposed to be a joy. It's supposed to be things that you find and kind of and learn to love and kind of discover for yourself. And it should feel like that. It should feel like a wholly positive thing and not a thing of shame.
I agree, because I read Midnight's Children, and I mean, it was one of those ones where I was like, I felt I had to read it. And that's a problem, and you could, because you're going into it with the wrong attitude to the reading. And look, I did it with Moby Dick, and it worked out. I did it with Infinite Jest. It was fine. It was grand. But you do, like, approaching with the wrong attitude is obviously not going to be a good thing. And like, shouldn't be. You don't need to read all the classics. It's that thing.
And life is short as well. If you're kind of like 30% of the way through a book that you absolutely hate, just stop reading it. It's not going to get any better after that point. Like, it's not for you, and that's okay. Somebody else will love it. It won't go off.
Yeah.
Put it away. But I mean, that said, Derek, like, this year I made this effort, because the last few years, a lot of the books I was reading were pre-publication proofs. So as a writer, the publishers will send you books that they have coming out in the next few months, and they'll want you to maybe, endorse them perhaps, or review them, or talk about them in some way, or maybe they just want you to read them. And I think for the last few years, most of my, like the vast majority of my reading was just books that I felt like I had to read for work, and they were kind of piling up. And I was going, there's so many books that I've missed out at the last few years, and even the 20th century, and I'd love to go back and read again. So at the start of January, I decided, do you know what? I'm going to read as few workbooks as possible, and I'm going to read books that I haven't read in ever, or in ages, and I'm going to read from writers that I haven't read enough of. And I've had the best time. Like, it's been brilliant, just like catching up with like the likes of Graham Greene, and catching up with all the Bolaños that I hadn't read, and I was like Jean Rhys and all of these amazing writers that I hadn't heard of, like I've just had such a great time. So there's that as well.
Yeah. And would that be your kind of genre, would be kind of around literary fiction? Do you move towards science fiction at any point, or any of that kind of fantasy stuff?
Like, not really, but that said, I mean, I'm not against it in any
Mm.
way. My husband now would read like anything. Like he'd read
Right.
literary fiction, he'd read crime, he'd read, science fiction. His, like, if you saw his to be read pile, it's just like extremely diverse and kind of interesting. And then our kid is studying creative writing at the moment, and he's kind of like his love kind of goes for science fiction and fantasy and that kind of stuff as well. And he's reading Ursula K. Le Guin now, and he's like, oh my God, this person's amazing. So there's a lot, like, almost like when you have 3 readers in the house, you become aware of 3 times the books that you've actually read.
Yeah.
You can give a rundown on them.
If I think I talked about this recently, about the idea of science fiction is something for me that I could never, like, I've sat down and written short stories, but they've been kind of in the literary kind of thing, literary fiction, I should say. Science fiction feels so out there for me. I don't know how people get into the mindset to create these worlds. And like, I know everybody's creating worlds with fiction, but it's literally creating worlds. And I can't.
Like with lores and with rules.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a whole different way of kind of thinking. It's like something I find amazing. Like, I wouldn't have the patience at all. And not just the patience, I wouldn't have the imagination to work out the problems within that world. If I say, no, if this is the main export, then what must this be? I'd fail miserably.
I can understand that. Was there a rumor though with we're gonna go with the unholy trinity from now on? Was there a rumor that it was going to be a TV series?
Yeah, so it's still in the works.
Okay.
I think COVID really kind of set it back. We were kind of trundling along with production very nicely, and there was scripts had been written by me, which was great, because I got to go back in and look at the story with new angles, because what works on the page doesn't necessarily work on the screen. So you have to kind of find different ways of looking at the story, and kind of different ways into what's actually happening, and condensing things here, further explaining things here. Like, being able to write it all again in a new medium was the most exciting thing. It was really cool. So that was all. I think between COVID and a few other things, which I won't get into, but all external to the process that kind of affected the process, I think it's kind of like we'll put it on the back burner for now. But like, I mean, like, in a way, I'm kind of thinking, who in God's name would you cast for any of these people?
It's I was thinking that because it's something I do, something my mom does as well, as kind of cast. And all I was trying to think of who we could cast as who you could cast. So I'm getting involved in it now. Putting my way in, but Maureen. That's what I was thinking about, who we could cast as Maureen. But maybe I'll think about that down the line. I know you've done screenwriting, you've done short stories and essays and stuff like that. Is there a difference when you're sitting down, apart from the length of the piece, but when you're sitting down to write a novel and sitting down to write a short story? I love short stories, they kind of fascinate me. What's the different mindset for them?
Oh God, I mean, with a short story, there has to be so much more discipline, I think. In terms of, that you only have a certain amount of words or pages to get through what you need to get through. And again, you still have to pull off that same trick that a good novel does. You have to make it obvious to the reader that these people existed before this and they will exist after this, presuming they don't die, of course, that there is a world around where that tiny, like, spotlight of the short story takes place. So the discipline kind of required to create that, I find very tough. There is an alternate view to that. The Northern Irish writer Lucy Caldwell, who's great and a really wonderful practitioner of the short story, has also kind of said to me before, and it was something I found really inspirational. She was saying, yeah, but because the short story is short and contained, you can do something experimental with it and not worry about how to sustain it for the length of a novel. You don't have to worry about mistakes where things suddenly get saggy or flat or anything like that. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a really cool way of looking at it too. I mean, it's the perfect length for experimenting with style or trying out something completely new or a character you're not too sure of, and kind of, there's a bit more kind of flying by the seat of the pants, I think, really, with the short story. Whereas a novel, you kind of have loads of time to spend with characters. You can kind of really luxuriate in kind of their company and send them off into different places and see what happens and let the plot kind of suggest itself to you, I think, a bit more.
I think with the for me, for when I sit down and read short stories, obviously a big big fan of Raymond Carver. But I was reading Emma Klein's latest work, Daddy, and it reminded me of that kind of style where it allowed for her to some of the stories are really about nothing in particular. It's just but and Carver's like that as well. But it's playing around with these ideas of there's not a big reveal. There's not this massive start to the story, and then we're going to find out why it happened. It just goes along. It starts, it finishes, but then you're thinking about it afterwards, going, what was the point of it? What was behind it? And you do find things in it. It's a very strange way to write. It's probably a very brave way to write, I would think too. It was just, I had that in my head because I was reading Emma Klein recently, and I hadn't read her novel, actually, her first novel. So this was my first, introduction to her, and she's really, really great. But for you, when it comes to writing, sitting down writing, does it help your mental health?
I don't really know. I don't think it does. I think it actually, if anything, it creates feelings of anxiety. I think because as a writer, you're the only person you have to blame if the thing doesn't work out the way you wanted it to, and that's frequently the case. Stories don't work out, or you might spend ages writing a particular bit in a novel that you just know is not working, and there's no one to kind of, not so much blame, but there's nothing to fall back on apart from the fact that this isn't working and you have done something wrong, So I feel that it can create a lot of anxiety, it can create a lot of kind of self-doubt and self-reflection, but in a bad way, in a way that you can get very bogged down in very quickly. If you take it, like for me anyway, I take it kind of almost detrimentally seriously. Do you know what I mean? So I find other ways then to get my mind off that. So I sit at the desk to work, and it's work. But other than that, like I'll go for a run, or I'll go and walk the dogs before I sit down, and that kind of gets the because to me, like, I feel the mind and the mental state are connected wholly to the body. You can't kind of neglect one and hope the other is going to be okay. It doesn't really work like that. So for me to go out and kind of do something, get the body kind of going, do some exercise, get some fresh air, whatever it might be, kind of puts me in a better frame of mind to sit down and do kind of the hard slog as well. And then important to be able to wind down in the evening, because otherwise I will lie there in bed. If I've been working up to bedtime, I will lie there in bed and I won't sleep, because the brain is still kind of hammering away madly.
So obviously you walk the dogs, you go for a run. What else do you do to unwind in the evening?
Yeah, I'm a fecker for the video games, but the weird thing is, my son gives out to me because it's the same 10 video games I've played all my life, and I'm not changing now. Do you know what I mean? I'm very kind of stuck in the mud. At the moment, I'm replaying Fallout New Vegas for about the 85th time. I was playing it there last night, and my husband says to me, he kind of said something. I was like, "Excuse me, there's a cutscene going on. A character is speaking." He's like, "As if you don't know exactly what you're going to say."
But you enjoy it, so that's what that's all that counts. And there's probably a kind of a mindfulness in knowing that kind of thing. Playing it 85 times, it's kind of like there's not a big amount of stress as there might be with a new video game.
I think you're right, actually. You've kind of already learned the processes. You're kind of almost comfortable in this little virtual world, and there's a control aspect to it, because if you do this particular thing in whatever sequence it is, it will work. And that in itself can be very kind of comforting. It can be very rhythmical. I feel like I've often said, I think I've said in previous interviews, like, as far as I'm concerned, Final Fantasy VIII is yoga to me. Just like going and playing with stats for 6 hours in a row. God, I love it.
Yoga, I like that. Nobody's ever described a game like that as yoga, but it's good. Would you describe yourself, because I obviously follow you on Instagram, would you describe yourself as a foodie?
I'm certainly an eater. I'm a bit of a foodie. I'm a bit of like I like cooking, and I definitely like eating. I'm big into it, and I think that it's quite amazing, actually. In the last, I think we'll say 10 years, but probably a bit before that. But certainly in the last 10 years and so, Ireland has really come on in terms of food that it offers in more casual restaurants, not just like their fine dining, but casual restaurants, street food, stuff like that. Oh my God, some of the innovation, I think, in Irish food, and also the kind of new pride in Irish produce, and kind of the business side of it as well, the young chefs and what they're trying to do. They're kind of creating things, and at the same time there's again, like you say, that kind of confidence is coming through. And for a long time, I think we were kind of, Ireland, our joke about ourselves was, and this is all like a national lack of confidence. We were all like, oh, we're so bad, all we eat is potatoes.
Yeah.
And, we live in an island in the North Atlantic. We get actually well able to create some amazing stuff up here, and we have, and we do. And I think, so for me, I tend to celebrate that side of things quite a lot. It's a far cry from the days of kind of like the boiled spuds and carrots.
I just, because it's the way you seem to admire it through your lens, food, and you can tell that you're somebody who really enjoys eating. But you were in France recently, actually, and obviously the French are renowned for their cooking. But I wanted to ask you, because you did take a picture of the Glorious Heresies in French on the bookshelf, and I wonder, it got me thinking how it translates over, because it's because, and look, this is the same for every other country going across to another, and with a different language, that how well can they understand Cork, as a place, like, because I think everybody outside Cork is still trying to figure it out. So it's like, I wonder how it translates as a novel, and I'm not just talking about the language that the people are speaking.
Well, you see, the thing is, every country has a second city with a chip on its shoulder. So there's a lot more in common.
What's France's second city?
Oh, it's Lyon, isn't it?
It must be, or Marseille.
I'm saying that now, like a French person would be listening to this and, how dare you?
Be livid.
Marseille or something.
They will not listen to this podcast again.
You'll have a French boycott, and the French are very good at letting people know when they're.
They do like a protest.
They do. They're very good at it, and kind of something I admire, actually, in many ways.
It is pretty good, yeah.
But in general, I think translation is a sort of magic, and I don't just mean the kind of like taking one word and putting it into another language. In order for a literary translation to occur, you need to have not only obviously fluency in both languages, but an understanding of the rhythms and the patterns of one, and what they mean and how it sounds to the ear, and try and be able to capture that energy into the second language as well, while still making the idiosyncrasies of the language and the country kind of knowable to a reader. It is a kind of magic to me, and I think it's a really profound act of connection almost, to try and make a story from one place understandable and something that people in another place can love. So I've been translated now into, I'm very lucky, into about 10 languages. And it's a great privilege to me, because I'm monolingual. All I can speak is English. Even my Gaeilge is shocking. I can speak Galway English and I can speak Cork English. I suppose that's what I have to do.
Cork English is the hardest English.
It's certainly the liveliest. I will fight people about this. I'm very fond of Cork.
I'll be honest with you, Lisa. I love the Cork accent.
I'm mad about it.
Yeah, it's so melodic.
I've absolutely swallowed the Kool-Aid when it comes to Cork. Like, I went to Cork for the first time when I was 17. Not for the first time, because I had cousins down there. Cork was my holiday destination. I never went abroad. So Cork was like my Algarve. But when I went to Cork by myself for the first time to live, I was 17. I just turned 17.
Right.
And I just started UCC. And I think when you go and find, wherever place you find yourself in, and that first taste of independence, that becomes your place. You kind of knot your way into it, and it knots its way into you. So Cork is very important to me in that sense. But yeah, trying to I do a lot of kind of talking with my translators. I'm very lucky when they want to talk, because sometimes everybody has a different way of working. Some translators really don't want the author's input until maybe the very end, when they're trying to make sure of this particular thing or that particular thing. And you have to understand that as an author. It becomes it's less your work now, and it's kind of a collaborative work. And if the translator wants to do whatever they want to do to make it right, then they have to do it. And you can't read it anyway, so you can't, you can't say they're wrong. So like for the likes of Polish, I don't know who my Polish translator is, unfortunately. I never got a chance to speak to them, which is a great shame. But I have great relationships with my translators in Italian, particularly. And the book did quite well in Italy, and it won one prize and it was shortlisted for another. And French and Spanish and German and Czech. you know, some
Right.
really, and it's been very exciting for me to kind of speak to people who are kind of their great passion is taking your words, and it is a passion because like nobody gets into translation for the money because there's no money in it, so they do it for the love of words, and to be able to kind of speak to somebody and exchange ideas with somebody is so fulfilling, and it really does kind of give you a better understanding not only of the world but of Ireland's place in the world and how we're seen. And like the amount of love that's out there for Irish literature, particularly like the likes of Joyce and you know the great Irish the canon, I suppose, as it were, particularly the likes of Joyce and Beckett and Yeats and Heaney. God, the love that's out there is really, it would take like, but like the funniest thing I think I heard, I was in the Czech Republic doing an event based around the Czech translation of the book, and at the end when they were asking for audience questions, person at the back puts their hand up, yes, and it's like, yes, I'd like to ask, have you ever seen The Young Offenders? I'm like going, what? This is not the question I was expecting.
That is random.
The person was Czech. It wasn't an Irish person. Like, it was.
I mean, it's it's random because it's obviously in Czech. It's a Cork. It's Cork. It's based in Cork as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was very not disappointed, but I was very. Again, it comes to that thing of the two. I heard the two lads interviewed from The Young Offenders, and the dubs. Like, well, one of them's a dub for sure, but the Cork accent's perfect on them. It's perfect. But the thing about Cork for me, right, I want to put in here because my father will give out if I don't mention that he does have relations in Cork as well. It's just my mom is from Cork and it's closer in that sense. And my grandfather is as well, obviously. But we used to go down there. We used to go down to Mallow, and when we were kids, and now it wouldn't be maybe every year that, you know, maybe every second year we got to go down.
Mallow needs to be spread out. It's just too intense.
Is it too intense? Is Mallow too intense? Is it? I haven't been to like. I don't remember going into the town of Mallow. It was always just kind of like the houses that we went to.
But there is a town there. It's quite an impressive town centre, actually.
Is it?
I must insist you visit Mallow again.
I'm going to Mallow. I'm going to Mallow this week. Lisa, I want to ask you one more question, and you don't have to answer this question, but do you have a favourite novel?
Oh God!
I know it's an awful question, isn't it?
I don't make me choose between my children. I think I'm probably proudest of the writing in the most recent one, The Rules of Revelation, and that's probably because I should be. You know, I mean, like you should feel like you're kind of improving or that you're developing in one way or another as you write, and so logically I should be most pleased with the writing in each book as it goes on. I think I have a real soft spot for the Blood Miracles, and that's because it's kind of the second dark chapter, you know, that kind of thing. Like, it's not the most lovable of the three, definitely. It's probably the most serious of the three, but I think because of that, I'm kind of like my misunderstood baby.
For me, it was like obviously the Glorious Heresies. I've read that twice, so it's kind of obviously, you know, obviously it might fresh in my mind and stuff, but. The Rules of Revelation really kind of started to catch up with it as I was reading it. It really started to catch up, and I was kind of, and look, I love all three of them. That's, you know, it's not, I'm having a go at the Blood Miracles, by the way. I really like the Blood Miracles, but it is the more serious.
It is.
But yeah, The Rules of Revelation is such a good novel. I'm so into music. That's probably another thing that kind of, you know, it kind of brings you along with it. Like, but Lisa McInerney, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on for a chat.
It's been so much fun, Derek. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I really appreciate you having on. Listen, could you stick around just till I end it out, and I'll take a quick picture with you, and then we'll go on away for the Sunday. All right. I want to say thanks also to John Francis for doing all the technical work that he does. As I always do, to my mum, my dad, my granddad, Jer and Calvin for the music and the logo. Find us on YouTube. Subscribe if you would. Find us on Instagram. You can follow Lisa on Instagram too, actually. I should have asked Lisa to say that, you know, but it's okay. Find us on Facebook and on Twitter, Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google Podcasts, etc. Thanks to everyone for watching. Thanks to everyone for listening. And once again, Lisa, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
We'll talk to you next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.